そうだ。Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Marco. I'm just keeping an eye out here for Mr. Middleton.
He's not there yet.
He's not here yet. It is 6:30, I believe, but we'll wait just a few more minutes.
Michelle, I suggest that Zachariah can start this explaining the procedure, and then we can start chatting about problems until Mr. Middleton show up. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm hoping he will. We've been in communication, so I hope he does. But at any rate, I have the local law right in front of me, so we can still discuss it. But he's the person we want the answers from. Sure, no problem. Zachary, if you want to explain how the meeting works, although I think we have pros on with us who already know, but it's no harm. Doing that. So thank you, Zachary.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Thank you, Zachary.
Yeah, of course. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. If this is your first time joining us, everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting except for committee co-chairs Michelle Birnbaum and Marco Tomeo, and of course the presenters. Following the presentation, co-chairs will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon, pressing raise hand, not wave or thumbs up buttons. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you are on the phone, it is *9 to raise hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. The chat is for technical support only to help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. They will not see the chats. If you have an older version of Zoom, you will need to go to the participants section where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you. Chat me, I'm here for support.
Okay.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, so with that, let me just introduce myself. I'm Michelle Birnbaum, co-chair of the vendor committee, along with Marco Tamayo, who you've just heard from. This is the vendor committee of Community Board 8, January 26, 2022 meeting. And we will begin, and hopefully Mr. Middleton will join us. This meeting is prompted by the fact that just a year ago, January, a new law was passed by the council called Local Law 18. It actually was an outgrowth of an intro 1116 that the council had been working on for a long time, and about which Marco and I have both testified down at the city council, offering our best judgment as to what should be included in this new law, which was to stress enforcement. We are very happy that the one thing that was included was a separate vendor enforcement squad, which this community board has a resolution about, dating back to 2006, as a matter of fact. But it has been incorporated. But the the secret is going to be in the details and in the size of the squad and what the methodology is for enforcement. And that was what I was hoping Mr. Middleton would be addressing tonight, in addition to many questions that I have for him. Let me say that this was supposed to be up and running last January. That was what was mandated in the written section of the law. Last month, we had the other enforcing agency, a representative here from the Department of Consumer Affairs, which used to be just a licensing agency and not an enforcing agency, but in accordance with this law has been given a much bigger role and is an enforcing agency. And at that time, they were in the process of hiring and gathering people to function as enforcers. In October, when they were here, they told us that they had 14 people and they were working on 15. It seemed inadequate for the 5 boroughs, but they had intended to keep hiring. I don't know what their ultimate plan was. I'm thinking probably around 20, which is probably understaffing anyway. And it wasn't clear at that time as to whether or not those enforcing agents would only be working for the Department of Consumer Affairs, and that the Department of Health, which is the other licensing and enforcing agencies for the food people, the stands, the trucks, the carts that have to do with food, whether or not they would have their own enforcing squad. So that wasn't clear. That was one of my questions. And that was what I was hoping to have Mr. Middleton address tonight. Now, I am aware of a lot of the concerns and a lot of the actual spots where the problems are. And I was going to go to that in the second agenda item because I wanted him to specifically hear that from you. And I hope specifically for Robin that he shows up. She's very frustrated. She and I have been corresponding. She has a vendor who she believes has a food vendor who's been on her corner for close to 5 years, 24/7. She has no accountability about whether or not he's going to the commissaries. I had called the DOH, who went down and inspected and did not find any non-compliance. So I'm very concerned about that. And that was one of the things we were going to follow up with tonight. So what I'm going to do, just to hedge a little bit and give him some time to come, and I hope he does. He always has in the past. Let me say, he's presented in front of us many, many times, and it's never been an issue. So I'm hoping he's well and that he eventually does sign on with us. So the second part of the agenda was going to go to issues that we've been facing. And I'll show you one violation that is on the corner of Park Avenue and 51st Street. Park is a restricted street. There's not supposed to be any vending on Park Avenue, and yet this truck is vending on Park. By the end of the meeting, I'm going to compile a list of anything that all of you have to offer, and I will be forwarding that to either the DCA or the Department of Health.
Michelle,
Jim-
Mr. Middleton is right here.
Yeah,
Oh,
he's
how
here.
wonderful. Okay, is he unmuted?
Yes, he's
Yes, I
unmuted.
am. I hope I am.
Wonderful. Can I see? Oh, there you are. Okay, thank you so much for coming. I'm very pleased to have you. You've been before us many times and you've always served us very, very well. You've been very explanatory about the function of the agency. I'd love to hear a little bit about whether or not it's changed under the new local law, and any information about changing and how you will enforce. But to introduce you to everybody, so Mr. Middleton is the Executive Director of Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, Bureau of Food Safety and Community Sanitation. He's been very helpful to us in the past, and he is the person that I forward our concerns to. and count on him to get some enforcing agents out there to solve the problem. So we can do this a couple of ways, Mr. Middleton. I'm gonna leave it to you to determine the format. Do you want to talk to us first and give us a little general presentation, or would you rather that it be guided by some questions?
How about let me do a little overview. Well, it's going to be pretty much a big overview because local law 18 is pretty expansive.
Terrific. That's what I was hoping.
Couch things so that you understand what's pertinent to the health department and relevant to us that I can answer, and those areas that I'm not able to speak to because they don't belong with the health department at all.
Then I turn it over to you. That's terrific.
So good evening, everybody. I'm thankful for being here and being able to assist in trying to explain out what the new regulations are based on local law 18. The easiest way to go about this is to say that local law 18 is very expansive. It covers a number of different areas, some of which do not pertain to the health department directly, but involves us. For example, it establishes an office of street vendor enforcement. That is being hosted by DCWP, the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. It's not something that's their lead agency, and that office is housed in their department. So I would not be able to speak on anything along those lines, but that office is in existence, and DCWP is in charge of that. The law also establishes a street vendor advisory board. It's comprised of a number of different city agencies, health department being one, DCWP being one, NYPD, SBS, to name a few. There are representatives from private industry and the city appointed by the mayor and by city council, also as part of that committee, and they're charged with doing just that, advising, putting together an advisory report for the city council. That's ongoing. So there's nothing I can speak to about that except for that it exists, and DCWP is also chairing the advisory board. So those two items particularly are part of local law 18, but it establishes the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement, and that's both food vendors and general vendors, and also the Street Vendor Advisory Board. And those would be best, any inquiries regarding that would be best directed to DCWP.
Tell me what that stands for again. I'm sorry to interrupt. DCWP, what is it?
Yes, Department of Consumer and Worker Protection.
And Worker Protection.
Formerly DCA, Department of Consumer Affairs.
Ah, okay, this is, okay.
Right. I had asked if a representative from the agency would be there because that they would be able to fill in where I'm not able to go. But anyway, that pretty much details the outliers. Everything else within local law 18 is now embodied in the administrative code, title 17, chapter 3, subchapter 2, the same as where all the rest of the mobile food vending regulations have always been. That subchapter has been revised and pretty much contains all of the changes for local law 18 that pertain to the health department, as well as some of the other agencies that are now able to enforce it. So in general, you have changes to the green cards. You have changes to licensing because there are now supervisory licenses that are going to be made available. And those are the two main changes that the health department is working on and involves the health department. To talk about the green cards first, because it seems like it might be a little bit easier to grasp. One, we've added some food items to be allowed to be vended from green carts. And that's single nuts, So single ingredient nuts, so meaning like walnuts, almonds, not candied nuts, not roasted nuts, just plain single ingredient nuts with no salt, no sugar, anything. We also are going to allow bottled water to be sold from green carts. And the way the law is written, it also provides for the commissioner to add any other healthful foods that we deem are appropriate. And that's a whole process. We have a team that's working on that, and there will be more information to come on any other food items that we may allow them to vend, like allowing them to use to vend sliced fruits and vegetables. So if you think about the bodega or the grocery, the deli that has the fruits in a cut up fruits in a container, so like a fruit salad. That's, you can envision that would be something that they would be allowed to sell, but only if they have the proper equipment to maintain the food in a safe manner. So local law 18 allowed for that. We are preparing to allow that to occur. In addition to that, we are also creating a wait list for all the permits for green cards that have not been fulfilled. So there's a wait list that will be effective on February 7th. It just got published in the city record this week. And on February 7th, the wait list will open for all green card permits. So that's just to refresh your memory, Bronx and Brooklyn have 350 green card permits allotted to them. Queens has 100, Manhattan has 150, and Staten Island has 50. And out of that 1,000 permits collectively, there's about maybe 220 permits that are actively issued. So we are opening up the wait list. And so we'll open it. When I say open up the wait list, meaning we're going to establish a wait list. So the wait list period will start on February 7th, and applicants can then go and apply to get put on the wait list to apply for a green card permit. So that will be taking place. And just as a segue, since we are doing that for the green cards, we're also doing the same thing for the temporary permits. So there are about 860 or so temporary permits that are issued right now out of 1,000 that can be issued. So we are opening up that wait list to fill those additional 140 permits that are now vacant. And that also will be taking place in the near future. So with green cards, it's pretty straightforward. We have food choice expansion. Nothing else changes with them for the most part. We are taking away some requirements that were on the vendors, such as they're not going to have the 2 decals, and you won't necessarily see the umbrella. But other than that, the permitting requirements all remain the same. It's just a matter of the food options are now being expanded in a healthful way to hopefully allow these vendors to be more profitable and also to provide healthy food items to the public. I would say at this time, I'll take questions in regards to this particular topic, just so we can then move on and we don't have to have things lost in discussion. If anybody has any questions in regards to that.
Well, let me just set the stage with the green cards. I remember when this program was first proposed, it was originally supposed to be 1,500, and they were assigned zones where they had to stay within each borough. There were zones that they were assigned to. And actually, it was quite an unsuccessful program, because while the expectation was to bring healthy food to underserved areas, the truth was, because the underserved areas didn't have foot traffic, the green carts were not profitable enough for a vendor to stay in those areas, which is why I'm assuming you're now expanding what they can have on the cart. So 2 questions. Number one, if you're expanding what they have on the cart, I see that because, as I read the bill, it says healthy food as determined by whatever your overseeing committee is.
Yes.
And whole grain bread can be healthy food, cheese can be healthy food. I can see these things, the possibility of them turning into little supermarkets or grocery stores. And I can't imagine that the supermarket community and the bodega community would be too happy about that. So I understand why it was put in, but I see a lot of potential for abuse. But what is the other change? Are they still assigned to zones, or is that no longer the case?
No, nothing else changed from how the law was written for green cards. They still are restricted to the precincts that were originally set. There is some clauses in the law that has always been that way to allow for precincts to be added or taken away depending on how the economics worked out and the health factors in the areas worked out. What I can say is, Ms. Burnell, is that you are mirroring my concerns and the department's concerns also in regards to the fact that we are not looking to create mini bodegas on the street. And this is a very conservative approach. What's in the law, the nuts and the water are directly in the law because that's where we started at. The healthful foods is in case there are other items, and there's been talk about other items, and those items at this time have not been something that we want to engage in. So right now is what we have here. We are coming out. We do have on our website, and I would direct you for green cards and also for mobile food vending on our webpage. We have FAQs on the changes that have taken place and what we intend to do and how we intend to enforce and to roll things out. So I would direct you to visit that webpage. It just got posted this week. This is all in preparation for the waitlist being launched. Any other comments or questions?
You mentioned the NYPD. However, my understanding is that they are no longer enforcers of any street vending.
They're
just advisory.
Yeah, at the advisory panel. Now, obviously, the police always have jurisdiction. They are empowered by the administrative code to enforce Title 17. This is a decision was made that the police would not be involved, that they would be handled by health department for sanitary inspections and Office of Street Vendor Enforcement for the overarching enforcement of vending on the street, period. So that's the extent to where they go. As far as with my operations, we assist the police if they need assistance. If they ask us, say, hey, help us with a vendor, we're there to help them with the vendor. If they call us in, if we need their assistance with the vendor, then it's the same thing still pertains. It's just they are no longer one of the lead agencies in the enforcement. It is now.
Well, as a matter of fact, they will refuse. We've had occasion where they have been called since this law has been passed, and they have stated that they are no longer a participant in that. I don't think, I may be wrong. If there are questions specifically on the green cards, okay, Barbara and Ora do, so that's fine. But I suspect the more questions are going to be on the trucks and on the stands. But if Barbara and Ora have questions on green cards, I'll call on them right now. Ora, you do? Okay. Zachary, can you unmute Ora, please?
Unmuted. You're unmuted, Barbara.
No, it was Ora.
Ora, you're unmuted. You can speak, Ora.
No, Ora, but you have to click the little unmute on the bottom of your screen.
She's unmuted.
I think
she
I'm
doesn't
unmuted.
appear to be.
Yeah.
Oh, Barbara's unmuted. Well, we can go to Barbara, but make sure that you can unmute Ora so she has an opportunity. Go ahead, Barbara.
Okay, hi, Jim. How are you? It's nice to see you. I did have a couple of questions on you mentioned Title 17, and this is not regarding food carts, obviously, disabled veteran. One of my questions is, the new enforcement unit at DCA, do they have the authority to issue summons under Title 17?
They have the authority, the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement have to promulgate their own rules, but they may be that they promulgate rules that say that they can enforce Title 17, but that would be under DCWP for them to speak to that. I don't know exactly.
You don't know?
I know they do issue summonses, and they have been out in the field doing that, but DCWP will probably be best able to speak to what the enforcement actions are.
Well, my question would be then you would know if they do have the authority that Title 17 has been amended. Do you know if it has or hasn't to allow them?
It says any city agency. I can't find this. I have the code right here, so that's why you see me looking to my right. I'm trying to scroll through for the enforcement provisions. And it may be that it's actually in local law 18 and not in actual Title 17. I don't have the local law up in front of me. It's because the local law, like I said, is more disjoint and encompassing of things. But that's something that I can get back to you on if you would like to know.
That would be helpful because
we'll have DCWP reach out to you.
Yeah, and then I'd like to know it sounds like there's separate entities. So my other question would be, how is DOH enforcement a part of that unit? Or are you separate?
We are distinctly separate. The Department of Health remains the Department of Health, and our activities are focused on what our mandates are in the code and the regulation for the health code, Chapter 6, regarding mobile food vending, and also Title 17. Typically, the split, the way it is now, is that anything that's dealing with licensing and permitting illegal vendors, if you were to call and make a complaint at 311, would be going over towards DCWP and the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement.
Yes, that's true. That's correct.
Anything that deals with food or insanitary conditions will be directed over towards Health Department. And typically,
so we don't know if the new enforcement unit has the authority to issue summons to a disabled veteran food vendor?
No, the disabled veteran food vendors are vendors. DCWP has been issuing violations to mobile food vendors as part of their efforts with the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement. But as I said, that's something that is not. But
that would be under Title 17.
It's something for them to discuss, because I'm not privy to what the inner workings of the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement is doing.
Yeah, this sounds.
Yeah, because the checklist that they've been, I'm sorry, Michelle, I know that I call DCA, so I haven't gotten used to the new title. I know that the enforcement unit's been going around. That I don't know that they're issuing tickets, but they have a checklist. But the checklist doesn't tell them what laws they're violating. So in other words, if they come to me and they have this little checklist and they don't tell me what laws I'm violating. So it's really unclear to food vendors, and, disabled veterans were a unique part of that. It's really unclear. I was hoping you could help clarify it a little bit.
What I will do, I'll speak with DCWP with or colleagues over there, and then hopefully I'll refer them back to you, Ms. Birnbaum.
Yeah, we'll try to have them at one of the meetings also. Frankly, when you read local law 18, it's quite confusing. They've introduced many, many different entities where our hope was we wanted one umbrella. But now with the advisory panel and all the different agencies, it's a little confusing as to who is enforcing what. I don't know if it's to anyone's benefit, but we'll go forward with that. Let's go to Ora. She's been waiting.
I just have two questions for later.
Sure.
For later, okay.
Thank you. Yeah,
Ora?
later.
So my main concerns as well are the food trucks.
Yeah.
But my question right now in terms of health, so we recently had an addition to our neighborhood called Uncle Bud's, this big green truck that doesn't sell marijuana and other, yes.
Okay.
It was
They
on my
donated.
list to talk about, because
Yes.
I was gonna ask, whose jurisdiction does this come
Right.
under?
Because I was ready to take out some alcoholic beverages, some bottles, cans of beer, some 6-packs, and then give them away and take donations. And I thought I could set one up right next to Uncle Bud's, while people are waiting. So my question is, does the health department
Who's
have to
in charge
do
of this?
something, where anyone of any age can, entitle, get a donate, give a
How
donation.
did, the bottom line is, how did they get on the street? Who's in charge of this? Where does this fall?
Thank you.
Well, first, that's the first that I'm seeing of this particular situation, but not of the general scenario. There have been department's been dealing with a issue with Weed World. You may be familiar with those trucks, but they tend to be over Midtown Manhattan, particularly on the towards the west side, where they claim that their candies or whatever the food items that they're selling have marijuana in them and et cetera. And so we worked with the police on a number of occasions to try to address those trucks that were proliferating. Number one, if they're offering anything for consumption by people, then they're vending, right? They're offering food, then they're vending without a permit, and they're illegal. So typically, in the past, prior to Local Law 18, the health department would just try to enforce as best possible with the police on that. We actually seized a couple of their trucks a year or two ago, and we still have them as the legal proceedings are going on. This truck doesn't seem to be any different as far as the scope of the type of business it's trying to do. It is illegal if it's offering for sale or giving away anything that can be consumed. Obviously, the food items would not be approved. That's something that we would be concerned about. So if you send me that, I'll be sure to have an inspector and take a look at it. The first thing that we have to do now in this new world of Local Law 18 is we have to just make sure that it belongs in our purview and not in DCWP's purview based on what the nature of the complaint is. So send it to me. I'll take a look at it.
I'll email it to you, but let me just follow up by saying, I don't think the jurisdiction of who's handling this should be by the nature of the complaint. It's the nature of the law or rule that they're either being compliant or not. And it's a matter of what their merchandise is that determines if it's food, it's in one jurisdiction, or it was, and now if it's general merchandise, you're saying these are now thrown together but additionally, there are ancillary agencies that are dealing with it. But before we get into that, let me let you go ahead and talk about trucks and the fruit stands, because I think those are really the major concerns of people on this call and the major non-compliance issues in our community. So you go ahead, and I'll have follow-up questions for you.
And just to touch on it before I do go ahead. When I said the umbrella, we have health department, you have DCWP, the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement, which has overarching responsibility for coordinating street vendor enforcement for food and general vendors, resides over in DCWP. So that's where the lead, they become the lead agency, and the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement is the lead office for overall street vendor enforcement. We do not do the split based on the fact whether they're selling T-shirts or they're selling hot dogs. It's more about the licensing and permitting of the unit. So if they are selling food and they don't have a permit, that would be going over to the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement. because it's a licensing and permitting issue, and they are directly handling that. The same thing with placement. If it were something, and the same thing where it was t-shirts, that still stays over there with DCWP and the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement.
But who's handling the non-compliance? In other words, if we have a non-compliance issue, let's even assume that the vendor is licensed. If he's who do we report to? It seems that this has been more confusing.
What you do is you make the complaint to 311, and we have algorithms that are already in place to direct it to the proper agency to handle. And as I said, if it comes to me and it doesn't belong to me, then I'll get it to the right agency. The DCWP gets it and they say, no, this really belongs with health. They will bring it over to us. And if we feel that we need to work together, then we work together. Nothing has changed in how the city agencies have cooperated with each other to resolve the problem. Nothing is being left out. Nothing's being pushed over and put on a shelf. We are still enforcing 100% in all aspects of mobile food vending, and DCWP is doing the same thing for general vending. It's just that the framework of who you have to answer to and who's driving the boat, steering the boat, it has changed some. That's why. So it is a little bit confusing. It's been confusing for the agencies also because we have to learn to work together in a different capacity. There was another element introduced. There's a mayor's office of street vendor enforcement that now, determines things. And we have a street vendor advisory board that now we're all in the process of working with that and trying to also sort out some of the problems and issues that you guys have brought up to us in the past. Not many community boards and electeds, and all the agencies have weighed in, and we're working on that as a think tank to come up with that report of how to straighten out the mess.
All right, well, before the end of the evening, I'll try to get some kind of 311 is not going to be the answer for us. We like something more immediate. That's a little, by the time that goes through the ranks, that vendor is either gone or the same issues don't exist. So we'll talk about that later, but give us whatever you were planning to tell us about the food, about the truck and fruit vendors, tell us, and that will spur questions from the people on this call, and I can follow up with mine. So let's hear about that new structure and what that all means.
Well, there's no real structure, no real change with anything with the fruit vendors and green carts. Green carts can be a cart or a truck, a vehicle. That's always been the case. Many people have not ever, you don't see any green trucks because that's just not been the business model. But that has always been something that's been allowable. A green cart is pretty much a term that was coined as a selling point. But the actual name of the permit that allows these guys to vend on the street is a fresh fruits and vegetables permit.
Okay.
That's the legal name.
But the green carts had been separated out because they were assigned. No other part of the vendor community has assigned locations. That's the only segment that has assigned locations, and they were required to have an umbrella. I mean, they had a format. So they're different than the fruit vendors that maybe they're treated the same way, and maybe you're saying their license is the same, but in terms of how they're visible to the public, if you look at a fruit vendor who's supposed to have an 8-foot stand, a permanent stand, and in our neighborhood, they are twice that size. They're in the tree pits. We don't quite understand the enforcing, and this is going on for years, about them going back to their commissaries. Where are the commissaries getting assigned? How are you following them in the commissaries? Now with the electronic chips, are you watching carts going in and out? I mean, there's 1,000 questions that this particular format does not seem to necessarily address, this new format in this law. But you go ahead, explain it as best you can to us, and that will elicit the questions.
And that's what I'm saying. It's not a new format. We have nothing else changed with green carts at all. They always were relegated to precincts. They still are relegated to precincts. No changes to the precincts. We always had the same problem, is the green cart vending outside of the borough or the precinct that where they are allowed. Now, and the green carts aren't designated for one particular precinct, it's whatever the precincts are for that borough. That's where they can vend at.
But they're not our issue. Our issue are the fruit stands.
You're right. The fruit stands may or may not be green cards also. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that you know these two permits, these are them. This is a regular food vendor permit. So a fruit and vegetable vendor who is not a green card is going to have this permit, right? The regular mobile food vending permit. This means that this guy's citywide or disabled veteran vendor or a borough specific permittee or temporary permittee, and they choose to vend fresh fruits and vegetables. That's their choice. The green card permit means that this particular vendor only can vend those fresh fruits and vegetables, whole fresh fruits and vegetables, but and the other items that we now have changed it to, and they can only do it in the particular borough that's punched out, and we have it on the side, the borough and the precincts that they can operate in. So this decal will tell you that this is a green card, and this decal will tell you that whether they're selling fruits and vegetables or hot dogs, that they are a regular vendor, they're not a green card. So that's the distinction that we have there. And the problem still exists, the same as it always has for the years that I've been coming to your meetings, is that we have vendors that don't go back to the commissary. We are working on that. As we always have been, it's a very difficult process to try to enforce against. Given COVID, these last 2 years, we have not been able to do a lot of enforcement whatsoever because all of our resources, staffing were directed by the city towards COVID compliance. Just this month of this year, January 3rd to be exact, we finally had our staff restored back. So if you want to
How many in your staff? How many in your staff?
This is the whole bureau. This the whole.
No, I many. How many, for example, in the what I'm calling the DCA, which is now the DCWP.
I would not know what the.
No, they have 15. What I want to know is, do you have an amount of people, or are you using the same enforcers?
I allot 25 staff towards certain activities of mobile food vending on the most part. But the bureau
is that in all 5 boroughs? Covers all 5 boroughs?
We operate citywide from a central location where I'm sitting at right here.
Okay, so it's 25.
And obviously I have well over 100 or so more inspectors that are available too. We move them around as we need them to do certain things. So if I needed 50 inspectors, I can have 50 inspectors to do something on a certain need. But like with anything else, you take from Peter to pay Paul. So it's a constant juggling game. Sometimes I don't need to have 25 inspectors working with mobile food vending, or we're doing different things, because mobile food vending is not just doing field inspections. There are other responsibilities towards answering complaints, doing letter grading inspections, doing inspections to actually certify them to have a permit, which we call pre-permit inspections. So there's a lot of different responsibilities that are involved with those inspectors, but that's what I get paid to do, is to manage that process.
Well, let me make one comment and then I'm going to turn it over. I'm sure, I know Robin probably wants to speak and others too, but here, let me just clarify this one thing. I had called your attention to a vendor, a fruit and vegetable vendor, for example, on 2nd Avenue and 86th Street on the northeast corner. This fruit and vegetable stand was expanded to twice its size, so it had 2 tables or more, in addition to cartons and whatever in the tree pits, and basically had quite an expanse at that location. I notified you, and in fact, you or DC, but I think it was you, sent inspectors down there, and I did get a report back saying that he was given a warning. My response was, okay, why didn't you ticket him? Why did you just give him a warning? Well, because
that wouldn't have been me. We don't give warnings.
Okay, well then it was DCA.
We don't give warnings.
I'll tell you what my issue is. So I said, why did you give him a warning? Well, of course they were trying to be nice. That's great. That's wonderful. It's wonderful if you give warnings. If you have a squad that then returns In other words, where you have a schedule that people are going around on a daily basis and they're assigned territories and they patrol like the meter people do. And so that fruit vendor would know that he got a warning and he would be sure that you were going to be returning within the next few weeks. But in fact, that's not the case. What happens is I'm using the plural you. It's not you, but I mean the overseers. What they do is they depend on the public to then report if the infraction is still happening. Well, that's not a way to do it, because there's no way that the follow-up can be consistent doing that. You can't have citizen agents. We all want to report what we see, but that's not our fundamental function. And 4 people could have walked by there, or 20 people or 50 people have seen it, have noticed it, have called it an infraction. Does not mean that they're going to take the trouble to make a phone call or go to 311. So what I'm trying to find out in this whole thing here is, what's your daily routine? An inspector comes in the morning, he punches the clock, and he does what?
And that's exactly what they don't come in the morning and punch the clock. Let me just speak to the DCWP, I think, inspection that you were referring to that took place. If they issued a warning, I do know that in the spring, when they were first starting up the office and this was a learning curve. DCWP hadn't done this, and they were growing into the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement. There's a lot of legwork that was going on. So part of that was going out and doing education and per their plan. So that may have been the reason why warnings were given at that time. I don't know, but that's one thing I do know that was happening, that there was a time when they were just foraying into this endeavor, and they were given warnings because they were learning the process and learning the environment that they were dealing with in regards to food vendors and also street vendors. So that was then, but we're talking almost 9 months later. So their process may be different. As far as for health department inspector, we have processes and procedures for how we do inspections, for how inspections are assigned. A lot of procedures are also anti-corruption based. So when you talk about assigning an area and having that inspector repeat that area, that is one thing that we do not do, because we based on DOI instruction or guidance, we don't want to breed familiarity, because then that, just for example, that inspector that goes to this vendor for the 15th time, now it's no longer a business arrangement. Maybe it's people calling each other by first name. Then maybe this violation isn't that bad. So that's the reason why we don't allow inspectors to go back and do their own re-inspections. We rotate them throughout the city. As I said, I have one office. My staff each week gets assigned work that's pulled by supervision, and we can only do but so much at a time. So if there's 200 complaints and we can only have the capacity to do 50 a week, then we're gonna do 50, and we can't. Then we have to try to get to those other 150. And now if there's a complaint that we find, typically we close when there's the illegal, no license or permit to try to end that problem. It's not a great system because we don't have the capacity built in to remove these guys from the street on most occasions.
That's the problem.
But that's something that has been brought up, because believe me, most of these issues that you see as an issue, we've seen as an issue, and that's what's being brought up at the Street Vendor Advisory Board. It's not just to improve, it's to improve mobile food vending and street vending on the whole throughout the city, not just for the public, but for the agencies too, to help us better do our jobs, to make it better for the vendors and brick and mortar communities. And as I said, there's involvement from both the brick and mortar establishments and community and private industry. And as I think
I
Senator
get that.
Clark-
Let me just get to some, Boaz Galil has his hand up or her hand up. So let me go to that. If you can, his hand up, if you can, Zachary, unmute him, and
He's
then we'll go
unmuted.
to Robin. Robin will be next.
Okay.
Hey, thank you very much for taking a question from the audience, from the public. So Jim, thank you very much for all the information you gave. I learned a lot. Now, my take, I'm from the public, I'm not from the part of the community, but specifically talking about the Upper East Side, I'm a big pro street vendors and food trucks scene and so on. And I was asking from your end, is it easier to, I mean, are you guys, other than putting more regulation and restriction and making harder for someone to open a business and to open to become a street vendor, are you guys working on process to make it easier to do that? That's one. My second question, and I know if I understand correctly, you're coming from the health department, but this may be even to the chair team, to the community board team. We are talking about regulation, we are talking about restriction of the vendors. What about protecting them? Talking about, I heard this afternoon that Biden is going to talk with the mayor next week. I hope that the community board is going to send some kind of a letter about the crime and the public safety situation in Upper East Side. Maybe the mayor can talk with Biden about it. But
what's your question about the vendor?
So are we protecting the vendors from in camping, for example, next to 96th Street, 96 Q train entrance, there is a vendor, basically food vendor over there, and there is a homeless in camping just next to him. Is the vendor is able to reach out to get help on cleaning up the in camping, on question like that?
Just to answer, he's a citizen, he or she is a citizen and has the same rights as every citizen. So if he or she has concerns about the surroundings or safety or sanitation issues within proximity of where he's trying to do business, he has every right to report it, just in the same way that we're talking about it now. The vendors are protected in the sense that they have a group. They are very well spoken for. They are a very well-funded, well-financed lobby. When we talk about compliance and we talk about what we can do about ticketing this vendor or ticketing that, it's not to make it seem as an aggressive act. We just have laws and rules and regulations that apply to the use of our streets so that that usage makes it palatable for everybody, so that a street vendor has a place and follows certain rules about dimensions and product and safety and all that. And a resident has a place and a bricks and mortar is not threatened. For example, there's a law that a street vendor selling food shouldn't be within more than 20 feet from the front entrance of, say, a supermarket or the entrance of a building, because that's an infraction on that business's rights. So the rules and the laws are not meant as punishment. They're meant in the way that all our laws are, where in order to live in a civil society where everybody is accounted for and everybody has a right to be safe and clean and not threatened, there are rules and regulations to abide by. And that's the substance of this meeting. And because this new law came out, we're trying to understand how the new laws have either changed, remained the same, or how the enforcing process has changed and what we can do, because in our community, we're very aware of street activity. And in other committees, you'll hear the same discussion about the open restaurants and the street sheds. And in the housing committee, you'll hear about housing, but in this committee, we're trying to figure out how we as bricks and mortar block associations, residents, how we all, and the vendor community, how we all can live together in a complementary way. And the only way to do that is for all us to follow rules and regulations. So that I want you to understand that concept. That's the purpose of this. We'll go to Robin now.
Hold on. So first of all, I had a question. The question was not only to you, but to Jim. I think that Jim received my question in order with his ad, but a follow-up question to Michaela. Is there someone that represents the vendor in this meeting, in today's meeting?
Yes, Barbara's a vendor, and many vendors were invited.
And also just for your edification, well, the Street Vendor Advisory Board, the Street Vendor Project, Matthew Shapiro is one of those board members, as well as Mohammed Atta, who are the part of that, pretty much the vendor lobby that for not all vendors, but for a significant portion of vendors. So the vendor's voice is present and heard at the advisory board as part of this mix. They were appointed by either city council or the mayor's office as appointees. But
there's no veteran vendor on that board, am I correct?
I'm not sure. I'd have to check.
I don't think so.
I have to check. I think it's whoever the city council appointed, but I'm not sure. So.
But to answer your question, Boaz, yes, they do have representation, and they do have our ear. They attend our meetings. Barbara's here tonight, and she is a street vendor. So go ahead, Robin. Robin's been waiting. Can you unmute Robin? Yeah, you're unmuted.
I have so many things going on in my mind to answer Mr. Galil's question. There was a time where I lived through 8 years of a subway construction on 2nd Avenue right outside my window. And the day it ended, we had 8 street vendors crowd onto a single block. And there was such outrage, and there was nothing that we could do, because my biggest complaint is when Jim talks about calling 311, you may as well just, yell into a dark night, because nothing is answered, nothing is handled. Since then, I have a street vendor that was leaning in on 2nd Avenue into a bus lane, and nothing was done until there was a car accident of some sort that moved that truck to the other corner. I understand, Jim, that you sent over a inspector to that taco truck, which is I've been fighting about for 5 years, and I don't care anymore, except for the fact that it has never, in the last at least 2 years, left to be cleaned at a commissary. Never. And you tell me that you sent an inspector, and I would love to know what that inspector heard from the people inside that truck. If he said, "Do you go to the commissary every night?" My guess is they went, "Oh, yeah. I don't understand any English." That's what I think. And they have established their own rules for 5 years. There's a little corner there where they are parked, where there's a platform where people eat, they sit, whatever they want to do in that. There was a night where there was a party in that corner on 69th and 2nd at 11 o'clock at night around that food truck. So it has been 5 years of just wasted energy and anger. And if in fact you don't have a better way to monitor what actually happens on the street, then that needs to be a job created in your agency, that of organization, so that in fact, those trucks that don't go to get cleaned each night are tracked, looked at, reprimanded, ticketed, I don't care what. But to have no rules apply to some trucks doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, it's not fair to those of us who live on these blocks.
Let me mention to Mr. Middleton about the chips. We had advocated for chips, electronic tracking chips to be put on the carts, especially the ones that are supposed to go back to the commissaries, because that is easy now with the electronics and, the infrastructure that we have for tracking. That's a very easy thing to do. This committee has it in a resolution dating decades ago, before it was even feasible, but it was just an idea. But now when a new permit is issued, that cart is actually given a chip, is my understanding, with the renewals. So the infrastructure is there, but nobody wrote the program. So not to have a program that tracks these vehicles for going in and out of their commissaries for cleanliness, to get food, to get potable water, to get whatever, is absolutely crazy in this day and age. And people may not know, but commissaries are private. They're privately owned. They are not owned by the government. So that if a commissary is located in a neighborhood and is not doing well financially, that commissary can close. And then that area does not have a commissary. And from what I'm seeing, it doesn't seem to be the Department of Health's purview to make sure that any cart that loses his commissary now finds a new one. So to me, the tracking devices are there, the process is there. Nobody wrote the program, nobody did the software. And to me, if you could take that back, that is a priority. And that would be an easy way to track some of the things Robin is talking about without even having to send an inspector. You don't even have to waste the manpower on something like that. And I know we've raised it many times before. And the agency took the trouble to put the chips in. So clearly they think they're moving in that direction. Can you tell us anything about that?
Sure, we are moving in that direction. When we changed the law to start letter grading, the GPS location sharing devices came along with that. And as you rightly said, we are installing these devices as we re-inspect these guys on their renewals. There are 5,000 or so permits out there, about 4,000 or so carts that are issued the permits that are issued right now. Those permits, the full-term permits, take 2 years for them all to come in through the process. Given COVID, that postponed us by about 2 years because we had to cease operations for at least a year. But the intent was in 2018, when the law became effective, we started putting on those devices on December 9th of 2018.
But you have a program. That's what I want to know.
We have a portal. We have a system in place that allows us to track these devices, and like it's everything is, when you're doing something new, everything doesn't work perfect all the time. So I wouldn't be the first person to say that this is the most Star Wars type of system in place. We are constantly evolving it. We have all the units do not have those GPS locators on them at this time. We're still in that process. And as I said, for the last year and a half, we weren't doing inspections in the field, and we were just doing the re-inspections and putting them on at a very limited pace, starting this past August. So things have been retarded and slowed down from what our anticipated completion date was to have everybody GPS. And the system itself has had its ups and downs because we're talking about GPS. And with GPS, and especially in Manhattan, where you have tall buildings, there's all sorts of systematic issues that we've had to deal with also. So it's a work in progress, but the system is there. The intent that you've laid out is the same intent that we've had. And that was the reason why we advocated for it. Does it meet all the specs that I would have wanted? No, but we had to go with what City Council was going to allow us to do. There were a lot of concerns about privacy for the vendors and other issues that also influence how we can implement this program. So that there's a lot of things that are not privy to the public of how to get things done. But I can assure you that your concerns, as you have expressed them, are the same concerns, and that's the whole reason why we accepted this the program to start with, to try to be able to do a better job at that and to track down these guys that don't go to the commissaries.
Okay.
It's not something that's is readily done. We have to focus on priorities. The system was designed to allow us to know where these guys are in the field as best as possible, given the signal reception. And we are now working on improvements to that and looking at new devices, and we're evolving to better perfect the system. So that's where we are with that. It's not that we don't have a program. We do have a program, and we are trying to operate it and maintain it now that we're back.
Okay. Thank you, Barbara. I'm not going to call on you now because you've spoken, but I will come back to you. But let's go to Colleen and then Barbara Rudder, because those two have not spoken.
Okay, I've been just listening in, and of course I live around the 86th Street corridor. So there's always so many taco trucks, barbecue trucks, popcorn trucks, the marijuana truck. I mean, they're just everywhere. And then besides that, you have all the street vendors on the sidewalk, up and down the avenues. But it just seems like with the discussion here, I'm hearing that there's more and more permits given out and more vendors being able to go out into the street, but then they're saying there's only 25 physical people to handle the amount of trucks. It just doesn't, and I never buy anything from those vendors because I'm always concerned, because I have friends in the restaurant industry. What about the refrigeration, hand washing stations, etc.? We also have a major rat problem. Go up and down any street or avenue, the amount of trash along the Upper East Side, on the streets, in the gutters, the rats. I had to walk in the middle of the street because one night on a sidewalk, there's giant rats the size of puppies on the sidewalk. And I think if the city cannot manage what is already out there, there should not be more permits given out until the city agencies are able to handle the workload. I think with the amount of, I know in the restaurant industry, the amount of violations and tickets and, unexpected, inspectors coming in, all their codes and regulations they have to stay on top of, and documentation. I don't think these street vendors are being held to the same standard.
Okay.
And
so
I just really am opposed as a resident on the Upper East Side of even more and more, because now we have more fast food. So Chick-fil-A, Popeyes, Taco Bell, more Dunkin' Donuts, all these fast food places that are already causing, and Shake Shack and everything else, to the amount of trash, which is now the rats, and garbage pickup. It's like this vicious snowball, and all these city agencies are not staying on top of it. And
Colleen, as a
I
matter
just
of
don't
fact,
see.
we've all, those of us, Marco and I, who went down to testify about the original intro before it turned into 18, we were all in opposition to increasing the amount of vendors that would be on the street, pending a fully developed, efficient enforcement mechanism. So we hear you, they hear you too. But now that's not something that Mr. Middleton or anybody in any of the agencies can address, because now that the increase is now in the law. So unfortunately, the council didn't see their way to waiting until they had a more efficient system. But thank you, because we hear you. Barbara Rudder, who is a member of the board.
Hi, I guess I'm going to say things that Colleen sort of said, but with a different point of view. As I think you know, Michelle, the vendors that are most disturbing for me are the food vendors, not the fruit and vegetables, but the souvlaki places and the taco places and so on. For so many reasons. They, first of all, the smells in residential area have really been inconvenient. They are the ones where you get a souvlaki, you eat it right there. The napkins, the grease, the everything is thrown down. It is the building management that is in charge of cleaning up, which I think is terribly unfair. And we have heard that they get the tickets instead of the people that are really causing the problems. Are there laws? I understand and it is increasing and it's serving the public. I know, because if you pass by those places, lines are, there's 10 people waiting for their souvlaki to be done. Are there laws to say you must clean up? You have to do something about the grease. There has to be some smell mitigation. You get a ticket if you see a while. And that I know in the community board that people that say it's the outdoor restaurants that are causing the rats. Personally, I don't think so, because I see the restaurateurs going and cleaning up immediately. Nobody cleans up this other garbage on the street. You walk down 86th Street and you feel like you could be walking knee deep into garbage. It's disgusting. Are there laws to say that, yes, you may have one of these disgusting food? I'm not saying that. That's not my business to say. Somebody wants to eat it, it's their business. But there's these food trucks and you have to be responsible for cleaning up.
That is a
Yes.
law, but it's
Yes.
the enforcement. But let Mr. Middleton address that.
Yes, there is a law, a couple laws, just to give a quick overview. Vendors are allowed to have a garbage container outside of their cart or truck for the purposes of collecting refuse from patrons. Vendors are also responsible for making sure that the area is kept clean. In the past, and I know you know Mr. Popola, Isaac Popola, but we have at times closed carts down because of the grease stains that they've left on the sidewalk, and we have made them, besides issuing them violations for that, but made them clean it up as need be. And it's not something that is readily done. Every inspector just can't go and tell a vendor clean up and have them do it, because a lot of times vendors who just walk away from the cart itself. There are a lot of difficulties that are involved in doing enforcement, but as we see a really egregious situation occurring, yes, we are taking action against that. We do respond to the complaints in regards to vendor garbage and leakage and spillage that's coming out, or them dumping water into the gutters. We do respond to those complaints. We have taken action against those complaints. We've taken action against vendors that are dumping stuff into tree pits. So that whole gamut is there that we do take enforcement against. It's just you get 5,000 vendors at roughly at any one time all over the city, and a number of those on top of that may be illegal vendors, which is a whole separate issue, that are also doing creating these same sanitary issues. And if you're in Staten Island doing some inspections, something may be happening up in the Bronx, and the Bronx Community Board has issued. And when you're up in the Bronx, it may be something in Brooklyn, because no matter how you slice it, it's a lot of vendors, and we try to get to everything, but based on the system that we have. And 311 complaint system is the city's system that is the department's means for taking any type of complaints or calls for action. That is just or process. Obviously, Ms. Birnbaum, you email me. What I do is I have Isaac or one of my staff make a complaint so that we can have it tracked, because nothing gets done unless we can track it, because that's the only way we can tell you this is what we've been doing. These are the numbers in that regard. When we do our routine inspections, the way that we assign out or work, just to jump back to that, is that on a weekly basis, inspectors are sent out to certain areas. We call them inspection areas. They're little small zones of maybe about 8 blocks or so that they can cover in a day, and where they canvass that area, and any inspect any vendors that they find in the area. They're running those, the decal number, the plate, so to speak. They're finding out, have they been inspected recently? Do they require inspection? What type of inspection do they require? Is this some guy that we were looking for from before because they had other outstanding issues that we need to check up on? So that's what our handheld computers allow them to do on a daily basis. If we find an illegal vendor, we're closing them. We find a regular licensed permanent vendor and they require inspection, we're doing that inspection. If it's a letter grade inspection, then we're doing that letter grade inspection and putting that decal on if they get an A. If they don't, then we're not. And then they'll come back for the next inspection. We use our location system to help us identify when we can't find these vendors so that we can go and do those inspections. What helps us a lot is if we get the decal number for any type of complaint that you may have, because that allows us to do the background checks inside the office as to what's required in regards to these vendors. But we have a system in place where we have overlapping types of enforcement. We have inspectors that are going out directly looking for individual vendors that require inspection. We also have inspectors that are being assigned to areas that are doing that same canvassing and also doing inspections, because our main rule is when we come across a vendor, we're doing some sort of assessment. We're going to assess whether they're legal or not legal. If they are legal, we're going to assess, do they need an inspection or not? And also if they don't need an inspection because they just passed an inspection last month and they got an A grade put on their card, if they're doing something that is egregious or that really is outlandish and not in compliance with the law, the inspector is going to do another inspection. They're going to address that particular issue. So if we saw a vendor that had his cart parked in the middle of the sidewalk as opposed to the curb, they're not walking past that. They're going to cite that vendor and try to get that vendor to move back to the curb. So we won't walk past obvious non-compliance as we do our jobs when we do, and that's any inspector. Typically, we would.
Can I just, I'm sorry, Michelle, I'd like to ask, because you will remember that pre-COVID, so whenever that we had a meeting, do you remember that the building on 85th and 3rd, where there's just rows after rows of different types of.
Oh, yeah, they were paying the tickets. That was what
they were getting the tickets. It wasn't the vendor that was.
That's right. They were responsible for the sidewalk. That's between 85 and 86. The building is responsible for the sidewalk up until 14 inches into the gutter. So they, in fact, and they came to us and we tried very hard to address that. And that is an ongoing thing. I'll let Barbara talk. And then Mr. Middleton, if you would answer, I want to know what you're finding with adjudication. That was one of the issues. And this board passed a resolution because the police complained to us when they were part of the enforcing method. They complained to us that they would write tickets and that they never knew what happened, how the issue was adjudicated. And if there was an error on the ticket, in those days, there was not enough spaces on the ticket. There's a certain form that only the supervisor had, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go into that. But if it wasn't written perfectly, it would get tossed out. And the police were very frustrated with this. And so our board passed a resolution actually asking that with the availability of electronics and computers, that when a ticket is issued, that it goes back to whoever issued it, in this case it was the police, to tell them how it was adjudicated. So maybe after Barbara Morris speaks, because her hand's been up for a long time, and briefly Barbara, because then I want to go to Elaine and Rob, because they have not spoken, but maybe at some point you can address that. Go ahead, Barbara, quickly.
Thank you. Jim, I have two very simple questions, but after I ask them, I'd like to speak to the street vendor project for a couple minutes. My first question is, I have a special vendor permit as a disabled vet. Is that considered by your agency a license? Because I noticed you held up 2 permits and you referred to them as permits. Is my permit a license?
Okay, so and this is where the way that the laws are written, we have licenses and we have permits. So every vendor has to have a license, right? And
The
that's
food operator license, correct?
right. Let me
Okay.
see if I can pull one out of
The cart has the permit.
the right. So
Correct.
I
The
think
card has a decal with a permit. I want to know if that permit is a license.
No,
no,
it wasn't
so-
anyway.
so a license is going to be somewhat like
That's,
this.
that's my mobile food license, right?
That's the vendor license. Now, a specialized disabled veteran vendor license, you have the blue or the yellow. And the way that process works is that you first are determining
That's where Jen. Go ahead.
that's where you first have to get certified by DCWP to be as a disabled veteran vendor, and then you get either the blue or the yellow license. That's handled by DCWP. It's not a health department thing in regards to the general business law 35A. So
There's nothing to do with the health department.
right, but once you have that general vendors, the specialized disabled veteran vendor license, whether it's blue or yellow, that qualifies you to get a permit from the health department under the general business law. It says that we cannot deny you a permit. Now, our process for getting the permit is you first must get your food vendor license. So you have to take the course, and apply for the license, and get your food vendor license. Once you have your food vendor license, you are now eligible to submit your application for a DOH food vendor permit, right? And we'll
So it's a
give you
permit. So it is a permit.
right, and that permit. What I held up here, these are decals. These are decals, and the decal is just a representation of the permit on the cart. We actually give you a piece of paper that says a permit. You know, it's an actual piece of paper.
So it's a permit. Okay.
Right, but the decal pretty much has all the information that we need to have and what the public needs to have, which is your decal numbers. So you can say, this guy number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the guy I'm talking about. We know who you are. And we also have other information on the decal that tells agencies and particularly was the police at that time that, hey, this guy is a citywide permit. This guy's a Brooklyn borough specific permit. So it made it very easy for somebody to say, you're in the wrong borough. This is Queens. We know that your permit's not valid. So that's what the decal is in relation to the permit. But
To the permit. You keep referring to it as a permit.
Yes.
Can DOH put a permit on a display stand? Do you permit
We
display stands?
We have standards for what qualifies for as a mobile vending unit, right? So obviously a vehicle, and these trailers, up to 8, but up to 10 by 5, and the push carts. Those all are in law as to what can be considered a mobile vending unit. A stand is not a mobile vending unit. That's we will never give a permit out to anything with 4 legs. We will allow stands to exist as a temporary food service establishment. So when you go to see the street fairs and you have the booths or tables that are out there, that permit will allow them to participate in that street fair, but it's only specific for the event.
That it's a stand, not a display stand.
Right,
Thank you.
but it's not a mobile vending unit.
Thank you. As far as the street vendor project, I just have to say, they do not represent the disabled veterans. In fact, the disabled veterans are pretty upset with them because they basically represent the unlicensed vendors and lease permit. And I think that there's an easier solution if the permit holder is accountable. And that's not been the case, as far as I know, with the street vendor review. In fact, they've been disingenuous. The churro lady and all of these people that you see in the paper that they're talking about, that's represented by them as lobbyists. I don't know how they got on the advisory board. They could have gotten permits. They could have gotten food cart permits. They could have gotten green carts, and they weren't told. They were just saying, we want this law number 18 so we can get a permit. You know, there's a waiting list, and now they're going to make a waiting list for these permits that were always available. And the street vendor project is saying that these poor people can't vend because they can't get permits. That's bothers me a lot as a vendor. And, you know, they could have been working. And maybe someone would be looking whether or not they got compensation and fair wages. I think that's something that, not your agency, Jim, but although you do have to report workers' compensation forms to the Labor Department, but that's a part of, that's going to be a part of all of this new law that I see only expands the black market. I'm not seeing that it is going to be helpful to those of us who are in the vending industry and that we work with your agency.
I think that's a real concern, Barbara, because the law was supposed to be one license, one permit. In other words, what you have a
Thank you.
license and then you
Yeah.
have a
Local Law
permit.
15 of 1995.
Okay, but that has not been the case.
Right.
There have been, you know, licenses, and then there are many, many carts, one license having many carts. As a matter of fact, that's why we speak of these as cartels in many cases, because, and if you notice, if you go from cart to cart, you'll see much of the same merchandise. The implication being that they're dealing with the same distributor, which makes it, you know, that's a very, very big issue.
Yeah, and
the
I
street
see, I
vendor
mean,
project-
it's gonna make Manhattan even worse as far as I'm concerned. I don't know what's gonna stop those outer boroughs from coming in. And once those people that get the permits, who are all now working in Manhattan, they can go to, say, Staten Island, that's gonna devalue the price of the lease.
Yeah,
I think
Well,
that's something
this-
that the bids are gonna be concerned about for sure.
my
There's
experience
a
with the
lot of
street
issues
vendor,
here.
there's a
I
lot
don't
of
mean to
issues.
get off on the subject, I'm sorry, but
No,
there's a lot of
I-
issues.
There's a lot of issues. I'll just say, you're right about the street vendor project. They are not representative of veteran vendors. They're wonderful advocates, but they're not necessarily for law, or, you know, they're looking to have less laws, not less compliance,
or,
but
I
less
mean,
laws
They're
governing the
representing a
situation.
certain group, you know.
I
when
mean,
see-
years
I'd like
ago,
to see
we-
these waiting lists,
All right.
but.
Well, anyway, that's for another
what-
day. I'd like to move on to Elaine, if that's okay, Barbara. Elaine Walsh, who's a member of the board.
Thank you, Michelle. I don't know what even to say anymore. It's been so many years, the same issues over and over. Tonight, we're focused on the area that Jim is responsible for at DOHMA. There is such a violation that's going on. Vendors or the
Is that
food-
your microphone, Elaine? We can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did on.
Now we can.
Oh, I apologize. I was just saying, you know, it's been years. It's the same issue over and over. But what's expanded is the total lack of enforcement. And I think what we need to do is get enforcement in a mayoral or city council, I don't know who the jurisdiction is, that pulls together the agencies again. And we say, okay, let's go community by community, identify what your problem is. What is the problem in CB8? We have a taco truck that sells tacos between 3rd and Lex, which is illegal. We do not allow food vending. Well, I don't allow, but the regulations. And they use a brick and mortar address and advertise that's where they're located. Nothing is being done. They double park or they park at the fire hydrant. They avoid the meter so they don't have to deal with no vending at a meter. But nobody is out there enforcing. And now the weed truck is there, which is illegal. We don't have state regulations yet. And yet, who is responsible? It's become the Wild West. I can go area to area. I mean, I was down on York Avenue by the hospitals, 70th, 71st. They have carts that are wrapped in tarp that aren't open. What are they doing on the street like that, on the sidewalk? We know they don't go to the commissary, but they just take space. So we can talk all we want about license this, do that, but unless we have a commitment to enforce and increase the staffing for Jim, so he can have inspectors out followed up by enforcers and get the tow trucks out. I mean, if you want to go to 86th Street between 3rd and 2nd, there's a leather couch there. Maybe you'd like to stretch out as you sell your vegetables, because that's what they're doing, 4 tables deep, all on the sidewalk. Nobody says anything. And I will identify, I'm the president of the East 86th Street Association. Our association has done so much to try to make change. We can't, because we need the help of enforcement. It doesn't matter what the programs are or who's licensed. It's get out there, and if you're violating something, deal with it. But I have seen, I'm going to tell you, some of the people out who should be enforcing, let's have an orange, okay? So there's no commitment. And I'm on tonight. I'm totally, Michelle, God bless you for doing this for all these years. But what can we as a community do other than have meetings and talk about it? And Jim, you've tried, but it's not enough. I think the commission needs
Let
to-
me show you this, for example, going to what Elaine said. Okay, look at this. Okay, can you see the hydrant buried in there? Clear violation. It's a holy mess. I mean, look at this. General merchandise.
That's a general merchandise vendor. Okay.
Yeah, general merchandise. This is on the corner. The point is that nobody picked it up. It's 58th and 5th Avenue. So highly trafficked. The vendor knows that he's non-compliant. He knows it's the basic thing in the handbook in 17 languages. He knows you're not even supposed to be near the hydrant. Never mind wrap your merchandise around it.
But Michelle, I have photos that can show us 86.
So do I.
And we all do.
I agree. We all do. That's what I'm trying to make a point. As I've said over the years, I have more photos of non-compliant vending than I do of my grandchildren. Working on this forever, but without a serious, directed, electronically supported enforcement squad, this is all meaningless.
Yes. I agree.
That's what we're saying. And you have the mechanism. It's not that you're not working hard. It's not that this one's not working. Everybody's working hard. But if you don't get it together, where there's enough manpower, where the situation is well funded, I don't think it's well funded, because when DCA was here in October, they had 14 inspectors. They were working on having 15. That's for 5 boroughs. Well, that's a spit in the ocean. I mean, what's the staffing of the meter people? Because I know if I'm over on my meter 5 minutes, I'm getting a ticket. I don't need a member of the public to report it to anybody. They're patrolling the streets and I'm getting a ticket. That's what we need in the vending community, because the vendors themselves are not treated well. Those who are working for others are treated very poorly. Their quality of life is not good. They have no access to water, to breaks, to personal facilities. They are abused by a lot of these owners. Hopefully this law was supposed to sort of clear that up a little bit, where there's one vendor, one license, one permit. But that was what the rule was all the years, and it wasn't really enforced. So very frustrating. So go ahead, Elaine, sum up, and then I'll go to Rob.
I was just going to say, with the new city council, do we think they care enough about the people who are being mistreated as vendors? Or are they just going to go along with the vendor project, which, I'm sorry, is misrepresenting the needs of the vendors? They talk about they need jobs. No, they're being paid under minimum wage.
Right.
They absolutely no protections.
Right.
And
they can work 14, 16 hours a day.
That's right. And sleep there overnight when it's not too cold. So, what is it? What are the steps that can be done? We're through this over and over. Who's taking the leadership in the government, if anybody is? Or do they just all want to get them out of their mind and say, oh, I did my job, they got a job? No, they don't have a job. You know what? I call it slavery. I really do. They are underpaid, mistreated, don't know what's their benefits, and they're out there dying. I'm sorry. And who cares about them? Who cares about their civil rights? Not the vendor project, but not the city council. And I think that's why in our community, we've been vocal, because we've been concerned about the working conditions. We've talked to the vendors. We know what the working conditions are. We know how oppressed they are. But at the same time, they should not be doing what they're doing, but they have no voice. So who gives them a voice? I don't know anymore.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry. You've heard
Thanks,
me.
Elaine. No, thank you. Rob, go ahead. Rob Burns, East Midtown Partnership.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, CB8. Yeah, I am Rob Burns. I'm president of the East Midtown Partnership, which is the business improvement district on the far south end of CB8. And I really just want to jump in to ask, and by the way, Jim, I want to be first I want to say, we all know none of this is your fault. And we appreciate the work DO, HMH, and DCWP are doing on this issue. It got dumped into your lap. We get that. But as has been repeatedly mentioned, you know, the Office of Street Vendor Enforcement is dramatically understaffed. And on the other hand, my restaurants seem to be getting a whole lot of citations for pretty minor stuff still, even with the new mayor. If we can enforce restaurants, what will it take? I'm not going to drop this all on you. And maybe this is an unfair question, but do you have a guesstimate how many inspectors it would take to adequately enforce street vendors the way that restaurants are being, at least the way restaurants are being enforced?
It wouldn't be something that I could answer.
That's fair.
There's about 27,000 restaurants in the city, or food establishments, let's just say, in the city, with 5,000, well, less than 5,000, about 4,000 mobile food vending permits. But it's a different dynamic in how enforcement needs to take place between the two industries. One, the restaurants, you know where they're at. If somebody opens up illegally and somebody reports them and say, hey, this guy is operating illegally, we tend to find that person. We tend to close that person or give them an opportunity to get a permit, because there also is no cap. So there's an avenue for compliance that's readily available. When we get that same scenario where this guy's selling mangoes on the corner, by the time we get there, maybe he's not at that corner. Maybe he's at a different corner. Maybe or maybe he was there, you know, that morning. We got there that afternoon, missed him. And we don't have the luxury of going back and saying, we got to keep trying to find this guy, because there's somebody else who has that same exact complaint or need someplace else in the city that we also have to service too. So it's not quite the same dynamic in between the two enforcement efforts. But speaking on another point, somebody had mentioned about the mobile vendors not being inspected the same way as restaurants, and that's not the case. As part of the letter grading changes was to normalize enforcement across all food service establishments, mobile vendors, restaurants, schools, soup kitchens, and there's one set of guidelines for them. And in restaurants, you have it in the rules and regulations, chapter 23, and mobile food vending, you have it in chapter 6, where we have the same violations. A hot dog, or let's say a piece of chicken out of temperature, is the same penalty, the same violation, no matter where it's at. If you are not washing your hands, that's the same violation, same penalty, no matter where you're vending, whether you're vending or you're a restaurateur. So we try to equivalate all those violations so that where it actually pertains, that they're the same. Say not having a thermometer, not having a wiping cloth in sanitized solution. All those violations hold for the same way for both mobile food vendors and food and other food establishments. Same penalties, same scale, same way that it's enforced. Everything along those lines was changed a couple of years ago to speak to that one. In 2018 letter grading.
Jim, can I jump in? Rob, let me just make this fine point and then you'll continue. I just want to address that the same as restaurants. We have the street fruit vendor, all of them have inventory trucks. Those inventory trucks stand on the street filled with fruits and vegetables, sometimes 24/7. There is no temperature control. If it's 90 degrees outside, the peaches are 90 degrees. In a supermarket, when an inspector comes in, they actually take the temperature of the fruits and vegetables that are being displayed. So that's not the case on the street. I don't know who's doing that. I just want to throw that in, and I don't want to cut Rob off, but it was timely because you mentioned it as you did. So clarify that for us. And then Rob, you'll continue.
Well, first of all, we would not be taking any temperatures of fruits and vegetables in a supermarket. Number, we don't inspect supermarkets, but if there were, say, a delicatessen and there's a fruit area, we check temperatures of potentially hazardous food. Fruits and vegetables, whole fresh fruits and vegetables are not potentially hazardous food. And none of my inspectors would ever check the temperature of an orange in
cut food. They check cut food.
Cut food, processed food, prepared foods, because once you cut an orange or you cut a melon, it then becomes potentially hazardous because you've now introduced germs to it. So there's a nuance there in regards to that. But as I said, inspectors, the same inspectors that do mobile food vending, one day they may be doing mobile food vending, the next day they might be doing a restaurant inspection. And we're building towards where they're going to do all of them all in one shot.
So it's the same group.
Right. We're all one big happy, one bureau.
Oh, okay, good.
So when I said I have 25 inspectors, I have 25 inspectors that are dedicated towards doing mobile food vending out of our bigger mission of inspecting all food service establishments within New York City.
Oh, wow.
So that's just my contingent that has been allocated. We have up to 170 inspectors for a head count that we use for doing things. So
excuse me, will you unmute Rob, please? He was not finished speaking. If you don't mind, unmute him.
So there are resources that are there, but it's the mountain is big. I mean, like I said, 27,000.
Yeah, no, look, I'm sympathetic. I just think that there's a solution, but there's a solution. You know what it is. We know what it is. The agencies know what it is. They need resources, and that's what's missing. But go ahead, Rob, continue what you were saying.
Actually, and first of all, thank you. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Zach, because I had a little coughing thing because I'm one of those people is having a rare non-COVID cold these days. So yeah, I muted myself and then I couldn't unmute.
Oh, I see.
But I'm actually going to totally go in with Michelle right here and then get off because Jim, I think you guys are doing a great job with limited resources. And that's just what Michelle was saying. You need more resources. And I think that's where the community boards, the bids, I think we should be pushing the Adams administration and council to give you the resources to properly carry out and fairly carry out your charge under the new local law. You know, it's tough, and it's new, and we get it, and we've come through a weird couple of years, but you know, we need some parity out there. And when my restaurants are getting cited all the time, and you're right, they can't move. But when the vendor can just pick up his cart and move a couple of blocks and untraceable, that becomes a problem. But that's not your problem. That becomes the city's problem, our problem. So we will follow up. But I do thank you for making yourself so available, and thank you, Michelle, Marco, CB8, and the committee for having this forum tonight.
And
Thank you.
What I can say though is, as I mentioned before, we just received all of our staffing back for the Bureau. So what you're seeing is us ramping back up, because we've been going for well over almost 2 years in the field, because we were dedicated towards COVID, and we were just maintaining by answering complaints to try to keep the lid on the pot, so to speak. But the pot is boiling, and we know that. And so resources are now being redirected back to where they can be best used. So we are doing more inspections. We're doing inspections of schools, inspections of restaurants that were not being done. So we have a lot of priorities of what's important to make sure that we're safe. We're back doing our soup kitchen inspections for those, because just because you're needy doesn't mean that you don't deserve to have good, safe food. So all of our programs are back up and running. We obviously COVID has had its impact still, because just like the rest of New York City, staff have contracted COVID. Staff are on COVID isolation. So one day they're in, they may not be in the next day for 10 days, or now I think it's 5 days. But so everybody's still dealing with that aspect of things. But what we do know is that we no longer have to deal with the fact of not having no staff or having very little staff. We now know that we can just manage staff as if they're here, we can still operate our programs. So you will be seeing us out there, because in your area, most of my medical appointments are up in that area. And I was just up there just the other week, and I did walk past, and I did take a picture of my double food vendor. I think he was on 72nd. I was walking right down where your board usually meets at. Was it 70th Street?
Well, you always have the popcorn vendor who's on York, on the east side of the street, York and 70th. You usually have the ice cream truck in season who is in the ambulette zone, where the ambulette parks on the northwest corner of 70th. There are a lot of non-compliant truck vendors there.
Right.
So I'm sure you see them. And certainly I've stopped and spoken to the one who's in the ambulette parking, which is ridiculous, because on 70th, there's a parking lane for ambulettes on the north side of 70th going east. The middle lane is for passing traffic, and the furthest lane to the right is for turning vehicles. So an ambulette, which is frequently approaching, it's a whole hospital corridor. There's a hospital on every corner there. His non-compliance is very much a problem, but yet we can't seem to get him to move. We had a food vendor, a truck vendor on a side street in an alternate side of the parking on 69th Street, I think it was. And there was a Mexican restaurant there who came to our committee. They were putting them out of business. These people paid a fortune for rent. They had employees. This was a total non-compliance. It was a restricted street. He shouldn't have been there. And it was a big problem getting him to move. But, you know, there are laws already on the books for that. We have pages of restricted streets. And certainly Park Avenue and 51st Street is one of them. There's no vending on Park. There's no vending on Madison. There's no vending. There's a lot of side streets where there's no vending. That used to be somewhat you know, adhered to, but now I'm finding that that's pretty much completely out the window. But look, this is all enforcement. You know the problems just as we do, and we are very grateful that you give us the time and your expertise, because that keeps us informed, and without being informed, we can't really, and without having a liaison person with you and with the agencies, we can't be effective in our role in serving the community. I just want to take a moment, because I know that Pauline Ferranti is on, and I had meant to acknowledge her before as the person who facilitated your being here tonight. She's also with DOH, MH, Office of External Affairs, I believe. So thank you, Pauline, for the role that you played in making this, this meeting happen. But let's go forward, and then just a couple of more minutes on this. And then if you have locations specifically, I'm going to tell you to email them to the board office. They'll send them to me, and I will address it with the agencies. After Bose talks again, Marco, our co-chair, may have remarks that he'd like to make. And then finally, any more questions? So go ahead, Bose, your hand is up, so go ahead.
Thank you very much. Regarding the restaurant comments, I personally think that the restaurant industry in New York City is overregulated. I don't think that we need to punish the street vendors, because the restaurant industry is being punished with harassment from inspectors. I believe that the solution should be reduce the regulation of the restaurant industry. Regarding Elaine Walsh comment about slavery and the condition of the street vendors, workers, my suggestion is to try to bring those workers to the next meeting. Let's hear from them directly. My personal conversation with the street vendors, workers, that they are very happy with their work. They love the street work, and they will be furious if the roles will be eliminated because of regulation. But again, I might be wrong. I suggest let's somehow bring those people to talk to the board.
For the record, they are, Bose, just so you know, they are on our mailing list. They are invited to every meeting. As a matter of fact, we have Bo, who I expected to see here. We have Dan Rossi. We have a whole bunch of vendors who do come with regularity, but they are not excluded from the conversation. They are in the
absolutely.
Conversation, and I want you to know that.
I didn't want to imply. I didn't want to imply anything about.
They are welcome.
Perfect. Perfect. And the last question is to Jim. I had a few comments from the members of the board regarding a weed truck. I haven't seen it, but as a general question, what is the status of the cannabis industry in New York City? I understand it's like a $60 billion industry in the US. There was some kind of a movement from legalization. Are we going to see it? Are we going to see any progress in New York City about it? I mean,
I would not be able to give you any information on that. That's
the wrong venue for this, Bose.
The only thing I can say is that if we did find that they were selling marijuana from the truck, we would bring in the police, and it would become a police matter. Our experience with these Weed World trucks was that what they claim to be THC infused or cannabis infused candies or gummies or food items, whatever they were selling, wasn't the case. But what it is, and what those food items were they were from an unapproved source because they had no markings on them. And I have a file drawer full of about a bag of gummies this big that were confiscated from those Weed World trucks that we confiscated a couple years ago still. So
they're completely unlicensed and unpermitted, and they don't have a food handler's license. They have nothing.
If they may have a vendor's license, that could be the case, but there are no permits issued to these trucks. And like I said, we are actually in court. Well, they're in court with us trying to get their trucks back from the police department because they were seized. on the west side. I think it was with the Midtown Task Force, if I'm correct, but it was around 34th Street. So
when a food vendor comes to you for a license, is one of the questions, what are you going to be selling?
Not for the food vendor license. For the permit, the permittee has to indicate what the
product is.
Yeah, what they intend to sell. But obviously, it's in this free market. They can say, I want to sell bananas today, and then tomorrow they can say, I want to sell oranges.
Right.
The law gives them 10 days to tell us that they made a change. And obviously, as you can imagine with the vending industry on the whole, in any business industry, that the notification process in that regard is not optimal whatsoever. So our processes that the inspectors know what foods are allowed to be sold on carts. Like you can't sell crustaceans and shellfish from a mobile vending unit. So we know what we're looking for and what we see in front of us. We always check to see where the food's coming from on every inspection. We ask them for proof of where they obtained the items from. We ask them for what commissary they claim to use. We also ask the vendors if we check and see if they're authorized by the permittee to vend on the cart, and we issue them a summons of the permittee a summons for that if they're allowing a vendor who the department was not informed was authorized to vend from the cart. So there's a lot of things that we do take action on to try to control the operation of the cart on the whole. But once again, these are violations that are issued to the permittee.
Where does this law calls for a supervisory license? There's a distinction here. Can you, because that's a new thing, can you just describe that for us if you would? And then I think Marco, were you wanting to say something? Yeah.
Okay, so I will attempt to set a limit, because if we start talking about supervisory licenses, we're guaranteed to have another hour and a half conversation.
Oh, okay.
But I will try to make, so just to let you know, there's no way that we
sum it up
in detail, but in some, the concept that was embodied in Local Law 18 and now was in Title 17, Chapter 3, Subchapter 2, is that there will be an additional, over the next 10 years, from 2002 to 2032, starting on July 1st, that the department will issue 445 supervisory licenses. So, and in preparation for that endeavor, and every year after that, every 12 months after that, we will do the same thing. So over the course of 10 years, we will issue out 44,450 licenses.
Double the amount, right.
Licenses. So the way that City Council structured the law is that vendors who could not, and this is part of their attempt to try to get people who have been buying permits and vending illegally to get permits. That was part of the intent of the law, to provide more permits for those individuals that was on the waiting list for mobile food vending permits that was probably projected to be at least 10 years long, if that, if that's short. So if you think in the mobile vending world, there's about 20,000 licenses that have been issued out. And of those 20,000 licenses, 5,000 of those licensees can have a permit. So there's the 2,900 citywides, there's the 1,000 temporaries, the 1,000 green cards, and then the 200 borough specifics. So those are the guys, those are those lucky license holders that actually have a permit. So what do you do with the other 15,000 that have been waiting for years to get a permit? So what this law is effectively trying to do is to give those guys, those people, an opportunity that are on the wait list. And there's criteria for establishing that wait list. The criteria, in short, says that you have to have been continuously licensed since March 1st, 2017, as a general cutoff. So in other words, you just can't get your license today and expect to get on that waiting list. This is for the guys that have been on the waiting list and had a license and maintained that license if they weren't on a waiting list, but they had a license that was continuous from that point on. that they would be eligible. Now, there's some fine minute details to that of how the list needs to be structured and who exactly qualifies. And that I don't think we should go into because it's just something that's more technical for my office to structure that list. But that list will get structured. And then what we will have is if there's, say, 10,000 qualified individuals for the list, there's a system that's a weighting system that needs to be employed where disabled veteran vendors have a higher weight than a disabled person who has a higher weight than a veteran, right? And that's the order that's specified in the law, and that's been consistent from decades ago of how the preference goes. And so when that list is constructed, they do an algorithm, or computer guys, and there's a decision made on how much weight is to be given to each one to make the system work. I'm not privy to that, so I can't speak to it because I don't know exactly how it works myself, other than we have that system in place. But when we run that waiting list, it establishes the list in the order, and then what will technically happen is, if we want to issue out 445 permits come this July 1st, we need to make sure from that waiting list that we notify X amount of those particular eligible people on the waiting list, from number 1 through number 445, or maybe to number 1,000, is whatever the permits division determines is their volume to get the return back. So those individuals will be offered the opportunity to apply for a supervisory vendor license. That's the first thing that will happen, is that their vendor license that they typically have that I showed you will be converted to a supervisory vendor license. Now, the stigma with that supervisory vendor license is that only when they apply for a permit, only another person or themselves with that supervisory vendor license, well, not only, but they must be on the cart. So that's how you're tying the permittee to now having to vend to the cart. And if it's not the permittee, it has to be somebody else who has that supervisory vendor license. That's how the law is written. So in essence, you have a similar scenario to the specialized disabled veteran vendor permits from GBL to an extent, in that, but there's a difference. Pretty much in that the supervisory vendor license, there's going to be a finite amount of those issued out each year. So if we were to project out that on day one, we gave out 445 licenses to those individuals, and they all applied for a permit, then only 445 permits could be out there, and they have to have those individuals on the cart. So I could work your cart, you can work my cart, but we have to have a supervisory license holder on that cart in order for them to.
What specific problem was that supposed to address that made them write it into the law?
It would be speculation on my part. From my recollection, there was always the concern about the black market. I can't speak for the city council. I don't know what was.
So you assume that this was in some kind of response to what they perceived as a way to control the black market, whether or not it's going to remains to be seen.
I would not be able to say, but
for sure, okay.
But we do know from experience in the industry and in enforcement that it's more about us now implementing what the law has wrought, and trying to do it in a way that allows us to manage things without letting go of the reins. So
right. I get it.
So we're looking at 10 years, 445 each year. And also, come July 1st, 2022, any other vacancies that get filled, that are to be filled in any of the other permit categories, will also be supervisory license. So if I have a permit now and I can renew it for the next 10 years without a problem, and still be a citywide vendor with my regular vendor's license, But if I give up that permit and it now goes to open to being vacant, and then they pull somebody off the waiting list in 2023, that citywide permit that I had for me now turns into a supervisory license for that new permit holder. So in these next 10 years, what you're going to see is a conversion of most of the addition of these 445 new licenses, but any new licenses from the old system, the legacy permits, let's call them that, the citywides, the borough specifics, any of those that come newly on board as a new application after this July 2022 will also be in the form of supervisory licenses. So that's
that plan.
Right. So the plan is by 2020, 2032, any permit and license that is not a supervisory license already will all shift over. So in 10 years' time, all permits will be supervisory license permits, and all this, and this rule will, at least now.
I'm not sure any of that is going to help us in terms of what's actually happening on the street. Yeah. But in order to address it, we need to understand it in order to address it. I'm going to turn it over to Marco, but before people go off the call, I just want to say that I'm hoping that you can take back to whatever meetings, internal meetings that you have, and to the extent that you're meeting with the other agencies, to say that if the mechanism is in place, they've got to sharp tune it, and they've got to get it all onto the street. Because if you're looking at the streets, they're less and less livable. So we can't do everything about everything. Some of us have very active roles and strong feelings about the open restaurants. That's adding to the confusion. But all together, each industry has to work on its own compliance. Otherwise, we can't live together. The bricks and mortar, the food vendors, the general merchandise, the restaurants, the residents, everybody, we only have, we have a sidewalk, we have the width of a sidewalk. We've got the cars, we've got the bicycles, now you've got motorized scooters, you've got, the streets are just out of control. So for the purpose of this committee, and this board has a committee that will address every issue, but it always comes down to enforcement. And for this committee, we urge you, we beg you to do what you can. You have such expertise, you're so knowledgeable, and you're very forthcoming, and we need the information, and we're very grateful for that, because otherwise we're floundering. But please, if you take back nothing else, take back that we are begging and will support any of your efforts to get increased funding, whoever we would have to go to. I mean, as co-chairs, if I had some place to go to ask for increased funding for vending enforcement, I'll be there. I don't know where to go and how to do it. They write it in the budget, or when this was an enormous committee that came out as sponsors of this bill. But I don't see that any one of them specifically made a point about the funding and how they addressed it with the budget. And so you can dream all you want to dream, and you can have this whole structure in place. But if you don't have the funding to do it, you just can't do it. So I want everybody to remember before you sign off that if you have specific locations, please either put it in the chat, and then maybe the office can then send it to me, or send it directly to the board office. What's the email at the board office? info@cb8m.com?
Yep, it's info@cb8m.com. I'm also going to put it in the chat as well.
Okay, any locations that you have, but you'd be specific, northeast corner, northwest corner, etc. And I'll take them to the appropriate agency. But okay, let me turn it over to Marco.
Thank you, Michelle. I think you handled very well the meeting. And thank you, Mr. Middleton, for coming tonight. Michelle explained very well. You're very knowledgeable. You explained more than beyond that we expect. Thank you, Ms. Pauline Ferrante, for coming tonight. And thank you for everybody that make a wonderful questions, concerns. And the point is, Michelle described that we have to deal with many people on the sidewalk, on the road. But one more issue that make us serious concern is right now the Upper East Side is the densest populations in any community or in the city. So that means the sidewalks are even more crowded than any other community board. So we need to have an order. We need to, or everybody has to be part of the solution. We don't want to eliminate nobody, but we cannot accept people that break the law and continue doing business and they don't care. I understand also you are in the process of the learning curve. My recommendation is what you can do for us. Exactly, I would like to hear. So everybody has been presented the issues, but I would like to hear from you, Mr. Middleton and Mrs. Ferrante, if it's possible, to see what you can do for our community. So we can have this meeting some conclusions that at least we expect to do something, even minor, but we have to move forward. I'm going to give you an idea. The street vendors, the green cards, or you call the fresh food and vegetables. Most of them, they make bigger, they storage the food outside, the garbage outside, and they take almost the whole streets in a very crowded neighborhood. So the point, for tonight, I would like to hear from you what you can help us, because I know there is a lot of things that you are planning to do, beautiful things, and I applaud that. But I would like to hear for tonight, what do you think you can help us? Because we cannot continue saying, yes, maybe we'll come next year or 2 years or 3 years. We would like to hear from you. Help us, please. We need your help. It means I'm trying to put in the nicest words, because these people that are tonight right here, they try to do their best. They use their time. They put their concerns. But if we don't have anything from you to promise to us, whatever is possible, I don't want to ask you something that is impossible, but at least something minor. But at least we can have something tangible for tonight, and we can reach some conclusion. Thank you.
Well, as the cliche goes, I can't promise anything specific tonight, except for what I've always been able to do whenever I've come out from your meetings, and that's to come away with a good sense of issues and problems and how pervasive they are, and to, as I've been doing, listening to you guys, coming up with what could be a possible enforcement plan that can be effective. But my thinking is always what's acute and in front of me, but also what's also good for the whole of the city, because obviously your community board is no different. Every community board is different, but it's no different as far as weight and importance than the next one. And as a city official, I can't give it anymore, but what I can do is look at what you have presented and say, is there a way that I can help to address those issues? So what I will do is wait for Ms. Birnbaum's list to come. And then we'll see what's the best strategy to do it, because sending 10 inspectors on 10 different days in a haphazard fashion may not be what's necessary. Sending 5 inspectors in a concerted fashion might do better in a more strategic fashion. So all those things need to be talked through with the supervision, with the director that I have in charge, Isaac Popola, for my field operations, to see what's the best process that can be there. Because many of these places we have been to, and we have had little effect, or not the effect that we want to have anyway. From our efforts, one example would be there's a jerk chicken guy out on Flatlands and Pennsylvania Avenue who it was brought to my attention by another inspector. They showed me pictures of something very disturbing. And it's a sprawl of illegal vending that's occurring there. And when I spoke with Isaac, we've been out there a couple of times, but we have not been able to be effective because the guy walks away. And so that right there says that now we have to have other resources employed. We have to do reconnaissance on when this guy is there, to see if we can get the police and get sanitation there so we can effect a seizure and remove off the street. So all those things come into play. The same thing with the fruit and vegetable guys. There are times when, especially with illegal fruit and vegetable guys, there's a sanitation law that's on the books for food rescue, and that also complicates the enforcement issue, because you just can't take a whole volume of food and just toss it out necessarily without first considering whether it can be donated or not, and then affecting that donation. So there's a lot of overlapping priorities that are involved in things. So we have to make sure that when we step out, that we're not wasting our time doing something, because if that's the case, I can send one inspector to go up and down 2nd Avenue and 3rd Avenue and write tickets, and nothing will get done. Because like you said,
can I ask for one specific, Mr. Middleton? Robin, are you still there? Give me your address. Can you unmute Robin, Zachary? And Robin, can you give me that address? Because maybe this can come out of tonight, where, tell me the address of
it's by the Pottery Barn on 2nd Avenue and 69th Street. I don't know the exact number, but it's on the corner.
And what's the nature of it? What kind of a truck?
It's a taco truck.
Taco truck. Okay. The reason I'm saying that, Mr. Middleton, is because that's something you can do for us tonight. He is clearly non-compliant in that he doesn't go to the commissary, because
well, not tonight, but I will get somebody out there to that, because as I said, I was right on that corner.
But you have to push it, you see, because somebody did go and came away with saying everything looked fine. Now, if he came to that conclusion by asking the vendor if he's gone to the commissary or not, that's not exactly an accurate or, good way to follow this. So somehow, either by having him move the truck and seeing if there are stains on the sidewalk, or looking at him a couple of times a day, or, something to press him so that he knows that that he is not good. Now that's a health issue, and that's not acceptable.
It's a very big one.
Yeah. So if you can either get him, and that's where the tracking would be, but question him. Where's your commissary? What's the name of the guy who runs your commissary? What time do you usually go to the commissary? Do you go in the morning? Do you go at night? You went at 6 o'clock. You know what I'm saying? In other words, that's
typically.
Yeah. I mean, you will then understand. 1 minute, Robin, I'll unmute you. But if you do that, not just a pro forma visit, well, where is it? Well, what route do you take going over there? Do you usually go up 1st Avenue? Do you go down 2nd? You know what I'm saying? Something where it'll be apparent to you and your agent as to whether or not he's telling the truth. And then at least you'll have that information. Unmute Robin, because she wants to make a comment about what I'm saying.
What we typically do is we will have to do an observation for a 24-hour period.
Great.
That's
but I think I heard that was done. I heard that was done.
I have to check
so clearly, these folks know how to work the system. They know how to work the system because for 5 years, they have ruled that corner, and everyone in my building knows that cart never moves. So whatever it is that they tell you,
Robin, let me interrupt you with only one possibility, and Mr. Middleton can get to the bottom of it by talking to the truck. Sometimes with carts, they have two carts. And the
Yes.
fact is that they take their other cart because they don't want to lose the spot.
No,
And they
no,
put
no.
it in the spot.
Michelle, they never leave. I have been up.
I'm
in the
just
middle
telling
of
you
the
that
night,
to make sure. That's
And
what
when
I'm
they
saying.
first got there, for the first year or so, every night they would move the cart at around 8, 9 o'clock at night. Every night. They had a car come, hooked it up, even in the dead of winter with snow and everything. When they saw that they didn't have to do that, their lights go off sometime around 2 in the morning, and they stay there. There is no car that I've been up because I have been sleeping so badly during this pandemic. I see that cart never moves.
Okay,
You don't
I
have
just want to
be-
make sure as part of the
Absolutely.
questioning that they're not rotating. You know what I mean? One comes in and one goes out and you don't
Yeah.
realize. Anyway, I think if Mr. Middleton is going to take that up and
Michelle.
go
Michelle.
ahead, Marco, continue.
I think Michelle, I think Elaine wanna comment something.
Are you want to let you? Okay, unmute
Please.
Elaine, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to
As I
say,
can show you, this is the actual the corner that I took. That's on 70th.
Oh.
The second. And I know that the other guy I had, because I take pictures whenever I'm out in the street. Believe
Yeah,
me,
that's the
I
fruit
take
guy
I take
who
pictures
has
of
his
everything.
inventory truck is parked at the meter
And
24/7.
I have a picture. I have a
I
picture
know
of his, picture of his truck right next
Yeah,
to it too.
It's
And that-
always there.
So
That inventory truck is always
Yeah.
there, so I wonder how he rotates out his inventory.
And that's why when I take the pictures, that's because it goes to Isaac for them to take some action. I'm quite sure I have a picture of that taco, the taco truck too, because I remember being up there and walking past and taking a picture of it. But we will send them out to look at that as well as this little fruit guy here. But obviously that whole strip up there by New York Presbyterians from Sloan Kettering on up has always
It's a big
been
issue.
a big issue. So, and this is one of those things where going there, unfortunately with a commissary violation, it doesn't carry that heavy enforcement other than for giving them a summons. It takes us a lot more for us to say, okay, no, we're going to close you. So if I were to catch them twice not doing that, then I'd have some reasoning to say we closed his operation down because he was failing to do that, or if we find those type of unsanitary conditions.
Whatever it takes, because that's a very serious health issue. So whatever it takes, why we agree, we don't think it's easy. We appreciate, believe me, we know it's not easy. So I realize, and there are certain legal and respect of people's rights and all this that you have to deal with. And believe me, I recognize that, but you know, we got to try. So go ahead, Elaine.
I just wanted to say, if we wanted to redo and have a pilot program in our community to look at enforcement and how we can focus in and SWAT team almost the neighborhood as an example for others,
Good idea.
Would love to be the pilot group for you and work with you, and we'll get the civic associations involved. We'll get everybody involved, the people who live there, other than those who maybe love having inexpensive food that they don't realize how it's not handled right. But why don't we work together and do a SWAT approach and work with you, figure out how to do it. I'm not an expert, and we'll join you to do this. Okay.
Well,
that's the for 2020.
I can't say that.
I know you have to take that back.
Right.
You have to take that back to the
but
agency.
Part of our approach is that we call them interagency task force or sweeps, just to give it a short handle.
Right.
And that's typically that's always been our method of doing things, of basically saturating an area with inspectors and doing a swath of streets or a square block area, depending on what it is. We 34th Street is the only way they handle that. downtown Manhattan. We've done the hospitals in that manner before. We've done Fifth Avenue in that manner before. We do in the Bronx and Fordham Road, because sometimes it's the most effective way, because the other agencies that we need to have, the police, number one, not just for seizing carts, but for preserving the peace, because inspectors are out there by themselves, and many times, especially in Washington Heights, for example, where an inspector gets encircled by the other vendors that are there, and now, so I have a young lady who is now fearful for her health, trying to do their job. So there's a lot of nuances that go into making sure that we have something that's effective to do, and it may be that we send 10 inspectors along with the police and sanitation and.
Yes, you should not be intimidated. You should not tolerate intimidation.
Right. And our intent with that is usually the best effective way to get illegal vendors off the street is to have that approach, because you have to take the unit. Otherwise, they walk away from it, and if they want to walk away, that's fine, because then the unit will get taken anyway, especially if it's a guy with a permit. That's where we've had the most uphill battle. We did make the change in 2014 to make the permittee responsible, but now that we're getting back into things, it seems that there's always a new law change that's going on, letter grading and all the rest. But the enforcement schema is, number one, force them to get a letter grade, try to drive public education as to what that letter grade means, so that if you have a C, that you're not going to be in business long because you're not operating in a manner that's there. What's disconnected from that is that the letter grade is specifically for their sanitary food operations. It's not for their business operations or their the business how they conduct business. So the lights, the sound, all those things, odors, those things aren't part of the letter grade. The letter grade purely speaks to, if I eat something from this establishment, will I get sick or not? That's what the letter grade is designed to for. So there are a lot of violations that don't factor into that letter grade. It's only the food violations that do. So like placement violations, not being at the curb, this guy can get an A and get a violation for not being at the curb, because that violation doesn't affect the letter grade. They're two separate categories, and that's the way the law was written. So that's what we deal with. But on the other hand, we can still close the guy down for not having a license.
Okay, right. I have to say, in Washington Heights, on Broadway, 169th and 170th, I think, that is a mess with the food vendors.
We work with the 33rd and the 34th precinct up there, because their food trucks they were there for so long that they could not even move. They actually put generators out in front of the trucks and just left them there, and they stayed there. And the precinct took the initiative. They got the tow trucks, and we went about clearing that stuff out. So sometimes it takes a big movement to get them done. For those chronic offenders that are sitting there and not willing to move. But the guy that wants to drive off, he just goes finds another spot for the time being, and then 6 months later he's back. So unless we catch him doing the same thing wherever he's at, and we get the opportunity to do further enforcement, legal enforcement, to revoke that permit, which is also one of the next phases that comes out of this, because when you look at the dynamics of the supervisory permit, July 1st, 2022, any new permits that are issued turn into supervisory license permits, forces the person who has that license to have to vend from that unit or get somebody else who has a license just like that to vend from unit. And when you look at the competing dynamics, if I have my own license, why work for you when I can get my own cart now? Because that license gives you the right to get your own permit and to work for yourself. So why would you want to work for somebody else? So that's the linchpin there, to say, if you want to work, operate a cart, then you pretty much better be prepared to work it yourself. And you're only going to get 445 of those licenses a year. And anybody else, any other permits that get replaced out of the existing legacy permits will also turn into that license, but they have the same thing. They have a permit that they have to now work their cart themselves or do some switching if they want to with somebody else who has that same type of license. So that will be spurred on by us starting to revoke permits also, which is later on down the line as we get everything set up. We'll go back to or enforcement actions where we take them to court for permit revocations based on the fact that they have poor inspection histories and they have outstanding fines and violations, which we were doing for some time before letter grading started. So that will also come back into play and we'll start turning over permits that way. It's a slower process, more labor intensive, and it's only geared towards those guys that need it. So you have the most egregious offenders. They're going to be the guys that we're going after first, and then we'll work our way down. So you're not going to get the guy who hasn't had a violation in 2 years and he's been inspected 5 times. He's not going to be on that list. But the guy that gets 10 violations twice, maybe the guy that we may wind up on a list because of how they're operating.
Oh, it's educated. Elaine, any last comments?
No. Thank you. I just want to say thank you, but we're willing to work with you if you set up a pilot program or whatever we can, and we'll resend all the complaints again to you. Okay.
Send them to me. You send it to the board, they'll send them to me and I'll pass them out. Go ahead, Marco.
We still need 311 numbers because they all have to go into the system.
Okay.
Otherwise, I have to tell Isaac that Ms. Birnbaum's getting 20 complaints to put into the system.
How about Mr. Middleton that Michelle is gonna send you a list and you're gonna do something. How about in 2 months we can hear a report of our complaints? What will be your findings? What is your action? What you did? Because we want to know exactly what exactly is going on a little bit deeper, and so we can move forward. And especially most of the residents, they are complaining, and every month we don't have, or every time that we met, we don't have any outcome of the meeting. And I would like to see to hear from you. What is your outcome when you went outside? And that's, I think, will be very helpful. And I would like to compromise to you if it's possible.
If we, well, number one, again, I can't promise that I can report out to your community board, because then I have to report out to every community board. And then I'll spend most of my time reporting out as opposed to enforcing. But what I will do is the same thing as we investigate these complaints and the other ones that Ms. Birnbaum will send to me. As we come up with that strategy that we're going to use, if we're going to do a sweep and we're going to do things, then I'll be sure to make sure that I let you know what the outcomes were with these. I think we try to keep up and keep you on whenever we get there.
Thank you so much.
All right, that's terrific. All right, look, thank you so much, everybody who was here. I think we understand a little more about how this new law is functioning. We still, and we have reaffirmed or affirmed that enforcement is the key. We've talked about that we are willing to help or participate in a pilot project. We are willing to go on a sweep with you. Marco and I in the past have walked around with members of Consumer Affairs and also DOH and sanitation. We've done walks around. So we are happy to do that. And I'm very grateful to you to have come, because without you, we wouldn't have had any of this information and we wouldn't have had a liaison person, which is what we desperately need. So again, thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Ferrante, for facilitating this. I appreciate it. And I look forward to us going forward. I'll reach out to you again and we'll go from there. So again, thank you, everybody. Do I have a move to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Okay, do I have a second from a community board member? No, it has to be from a community board member. I'll second it. Okay, all right. Thanks again to all the board members and to the members of the public and to the agency. Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
It's nice seeing you
Stay
all.
safe, stay
Nice seeing
safe
Ms.
and
Morris.
healthy.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye.
Excellent meeting.
Take care.